Well, good morning, everybody. It's time to start our Bible class. It's 9:30. I find it pretty funny when I look at the closed captions. It said it's time to start our fiberglass. Oh, well. Doing the best they can. So, let's see everybody kind of get settled in. Let's see, give a little time. We got people coming online with us. Get the class settled down a little bit, get settled. Good morning, Becky. Let's see what that's, yeah. So I did a did a little bit of switching around so that we could maybe get a better quality in here in the classroom. It's just really jerky. It just wasn't flowing. But right now my computer is too high a resolution. Whoa, but that's actually capturing it all. Okay. Good. It's funny, you get one piece of hardware and it's all like up to date, it's the newest, greatest, and then anything that connects to it grows old. It gets old, and then it can't meet the same. So then you have to get rid of the old so that it's new, and then the thing that you just got new becomes old. And so it's like technology connecting to technology and all these different devices. And so I've got all these computers, and each of them are their own different shelf lives, and the shelf lives don't play good with each other. And oh man, it's I can appreciate so much more now, I think, when I look at different video productions and YouTube stuff that people put together. My hat's off to you guys. I mean, it looks easy, but it's not. And when you start adding multiple pieces of technology together, so anyway, hope you're ready for the class. We've continued in our look at our apologetics and trying to come up with a way that we can present and be able to defend our faith when we're faced with overwhelming supposed evidences that the earth is a billion years, the universe is billions and billions of years, that all of these things just were accidental, and that somehow, and every one of those pieces of science that we're looking at seems to always put the Christian in some sort of a position that we have to contradict God and the Bible. And then so what does that do? That then goes, okay, as a Christian, we have to go look at our source. Well, what's your source? Well, the source is the Bible. So then what's wrong with the Bible? Well, it's written by men. Aha, there it is, men, right? And so how did they get it? Well, we didn't even start writing until, we didn't have written languages until thousands of years after, but whatever. And so, the language being passed down and translations and all this and oral tradition and on. And so as Christians, we get barraged with this idea that our one source, which is the Bible, is not credible. And therefore, then, whenever we hear things in the Bible about a talking snake, a donkey, an axe head floating, these things like that, and then we look at 6 days in creation, we start to go, well, as Christians, well, maybe it isn't 6 days. Maybe that's a billion-year day. And so that's dangerous because we're allowing science that is being proclaimed now, and I'm saying this I got to be careful because science is legitimate, science is good. It's the application and interpretation of the data. That's the problem. And if it's not applied right, the scientific method, then the ramifications are huge. And if you come with the idea with a certain preconceived concepts, then you can apply the observable and things like that that don't make sense. When we just look at the theory of the universe, going back to Plato, that the earth was the center of the universe. We looked at that. We looked at one of those videos where it showed, the astronomical design of the universe and stuff, and that for centuries, we forced science to tell the story that wasn't real. The universe did not revolve around the earth. And then we come along to this enlightened period where then all of a sudden we have Darwinism and then atheism, and then we have and they pull science and they're applying it, trying to get rid of God to fit this evolutionary process that requires billions of years. And when people, are not godly, they're going to try to get rid of him because then they don't have any moral judgment. That's honestly what it is. So we as Christians, if I want to I want to embolden you, encourage you with these classes, if anything, even if you're not going to walk away and say, oh, I know every bit of what we've been going through in every class, and now I can articulate it and every time when somebody brings it up. No, you're not going to be able to. But I want you to have the source to go to, and if anything, encourage you to hold on to your faith. God is real. 6 days is 6 days. Genesis is historical. And the fact that it wasn't until the modern centuries that all of a sudden we started having all this confusion should tell you something. Or were people so dumb before that that we should ignore 16 centuries of things that, were accepted historically, especially when we look at the Bible, that all of a sudden we're reverse engineering, in other words, I think. We're trying to take what, God is there and undo and get rid of him somehow. So I want these classes for us as Christians. And if there's somebody here that is watching online that's not a Christian, I hope that you will consider this evidences and look at it and reconsider the fact that what you're being told is not as solid as you think. And so you need to as well reevaluate. So now, this fits with the class this morning about when it comes to the idea of dating. How do you date things? We have a timeline. And so this idea of radiocarbon dating, now it's a little, the speaker or the guy on this one, you're going to have to listen. I mean, he's not overwhelming, but just kind of get an idea of what he's saying. He introduces some things about radiocarbon dating that I had never heard before, that is even stronger evidence that our radiocarbon dating methods that we're using to date things is not good. Another thing to keep in mind, nobody is alive today that lived post-catastrophic flood. Nobody. No scientists, no written documents. There's no environmentalists, no geologists, no physicists that lived before the cataclysmic event. Nobody was present to observe, to scientifically document processes before the flood. Nobody was present during creation. On the same side, nobody was present during the, quote, Big Bang, if you want to go that way. Now, so science is fixed and limited in a sense that it has to describe the observable, predict, and then reproduce, and then go through the scientific method. If you have an environment in which you are living in right now, everything is in a status. It's status. It's not rapidly changing. It's where it's at. It's kind of like your house. When you have a temperature at a certain point, that's where it's at. Unless something catastrophic occurs, the rate stays about the same. You know, the Earth rotates the same. We don't have the axis flipping around. We don't have meteors. It's pretty much consistent. Now, prior to that catastrophic, it had its own stasis. Nobody observed that. So you're basing, again, on things that nobody's been able to really observe. And so you're taking the point of reference historically from right now and trying to reapply it in the past. So that's what I want us to consider as we look and we think of this. So we're going to go ahead and watch the video, and then we'll have a little bit of discussion. It's about, I think, 19 minutes. So let's go ahead and watch the video.
How can we then depend so much upon the radiometric dating?
Well, if we're in a court of law, the judge and jury would throw out the evidence because they couldn't really depend on these methods giving you reliable, accurate results.
But we would say that we do have an eyewitness that has given us testimony as to what really happened in that time. In the past.
God has given us an eyewitness testimony in the book of Genesis. And he's laid out the history of the earth, starting with supernatural creation, where trees were already bearing fruit. If we were going back and looking at those trees, from our everyday experience, we'd expect those trees have been around for a while to have grown and produced fruit. And we see rocks that by our normal observation today, we would think have taken a long time to form. But no, God was there and he supernaturally, instantly created them. That's what he says in his eyewitness record in the book of Genesis. And then he goes on to say there was a time when he judged the earth because of human wickedness at the time of the flood. And at that time, he caused catastrophic things to happen. Water came from inside of the earth, molten material came from inside the earth, and the earth's surface was totally reshaped. All the high hills and the mountains were covered in water, and Noah came out to a totally different world to the one that he'd experienced before the flood. And so geological processes were speeded up to such magnitudes and rates that we can't even imagine today. We can only get hints at by stepping back and looking at the geological record and looking at the big picture of the geologic record. I think that's very important. Just like we stepped back before, yes, we can see this cinder cone volcano behind us looks quite large, but it's small by comparison to what we see even in human history with Mount St. Helens. But these lava flows are small by comparison to what we see in the geologic record. And so we see evidence that we need to open our eyes to a bigger picture on a bigger scale and start to think in terms of what was going on around the world at that time.
And the conventional paradigm seems to cut itself off from that picture, from the picture that the present is not really the key to the past, because obviously the past holds some massive, massive catastrophic events that are not going on today.
In fact, the Bible would say that the past is the key to the present. If you want to understand why the way the world is today, you've got to understand what happened in the past. And yet the conventional wisdom is that we should look only at the present and extrapolate that back into the past. And Charles Lyell went so far as to say only present day rates can be used to interpret the past. But fortunately, conventional geologists are now realizing that that doesn't work. That doesn't work.
Well, Andrew, when we talk about that accelerated decay, my dad worked in nuclear physics for a long time. That generates heat. Does that raise an issue for?
It does raise an issue, but we can answer the question from almost the negative. If there was a lot of heat, you would melt rocks. So you would expect evidence of melting of rocks. And we don't see that. So that indicates there may not have been the excessive heat produced by that accelerated decay. Another indicator, we talked about radio halos. Once you get to a certain temperature, the damage in the crystals gets healed. The atoms vibrate and they snap back into their original positions. And so the halos disappear. So the very fact that we can see radio halos in rocks that were formed, in the past, indicates that there hasn't been an excessive amount of heat. So the fact that the radio halos, the polonium ones, require accelerated decay, yet we can still see the end product, the polonium radio halo, indicates that during that accelerated decay, there can't have been a lot of heat produced. Another indication is even with the helium. We talked about the helium leaking out of those crystals. We know that if you heat the crystal up, then you're potentially going to leak that helium out more rapidly. Everyone's familiar with a helium balloon.
Yes.
You know, you leave them in your living room for a while, they float at the top of the ceiling, but eventually that helium leaks out and they'll start to fall to the ground. Now, if you start to warm that, it's going to, because it's going to expand, it's going to force its way out of the membrane holding it in much faster. So there's a number of indicators that give us a clue that the heat may not have been a problem that some people have suggested. I mean, we're still exploring these issues. That's what I enjoy about science. You know, if we had all the answers, there'd be no hard work to do. And that's what makes it exciting. And you can live with the tension of not knowing all the answers. So the fact that I can give you several lines of evidence that indicate that heat might not have been a problem leads me not to be concerned about that being a problem. Where I've got strong evidence as well that the decay rates have been much faster in the past. And as we said before, a rock that's older will have experienced more accelerated decay. So it's not as if that it isn't a tool that we can use, but we have to adjust our thinking about how we use that tool. It cannot give us reliable absolute ages.
So we're still left with some mysteries associated with this whole radiometric dating issue.
That's right.
But after that 8 years, did you leave more convinced or less convinced in the record that's in Genesis?
Oh, much more convinced. Now we had concrete lines of evidence that we could point to and say, yes, the Bible is giving us an accurate historic record. So first of all was that if we use the different dating methods, the radioactive parent atoms, on the same samples from the same rock units, that we invariably got discordant ages.
And you would expect the same.
When normally the textbooks said that you'd have the methods all giving you the same results because they all started at time zero. The clock started at time zero. So what we discovered is that, yes, they would have started at time zero, but the decay rate must have speeded up by different amounts for different parent atoms. And we're talking about very large changes. We also established that the radioactive decay had happened. There was a lot of radioactive decay had happened. We had two lines of evidence for that. That was the radio halos, which was the little bullets fired by the uranium decaying. And also sometimes the uranium atom splits, as in an atomic bomb. We call that a fission. And so you actually find the particles also damage the crystal. So fission tracks, radio halos, that were evidence of a lot of radioactive decay had occurred, but obviously it had occurred at a very rapid rate. We also saw that in relation to helium leakage. It gave an age of only 6,000 years, so that in real time of 6,000 years, in some time in the past, there'd been 1.5 billion years worth of radioactive decay. So these are the pieces of the puzzle that we came to. And this questions the whole conventional way of thinking of Earth history, and yet it strengthens our argument that we need to look back at the book of Genesis, God's eyewitness record that indicates Earth history was much shorter. And that's what we're seeing from these results, from looking at the radioactive decay in rocks, both the volcanic rocks that we see here, as well as radiocarbon in fossils and fossil vegetation, etc. And this fits in with the picture we have here. Remember, we said before, this lava flow is only small in comparison to the volumes of lavas that were erupted catastrophically in the past. We see lots of indications of catastrophic geological processes in the past, not just one line of evidence, volcanoes, radioactive decay is another line of evidence, and more that we'll talk about when I show you some of the evidence down there in Sedona.
I had no idea how many crystal shops were in Sedona.
No, and I'm glad you let me stop by because I wanted to get this piece of petrified wood. Arizona is famous for its petrified wood, and it's part of what we need to discuss here.
Well, when we were talking about isotopes, one of the things we didn't address was the whole area of carbon-14. I mean, most people are familiar, and yet I'm not sure we know exactly what that is. Can you describe that?
Well, first of all, we need to clear up a confusion. Most people think that radiocarbon has been used to date rocks. Whenever they think of radioactive dating, they think of radiocarbon because that's what they're used to hearing. But radiocarbon isn't used to date rocks because most rocks don't have carbon in them. And what we need is organic carbon because it's intrinsic to the methodology or how you understand how radiocarbon works.
How does a tree then get carbon-14 in it?
Well, it's simple because the radiocarbon is produced in the upper atmosphere. Cosmic rays bombarding the Earth's atmosphere turns nitrogen atoms into carbon-14 atoms, which circulates into the carbon dioxide that we breathe. And so it's also taken in by the plants during photosynthesis. So it's in the wood, it's in the leaves, it's in the vegetables we eat. Animals take it into their bodies. So it's in the animals that we eat. So it gets into our bodies. So not only are all these plants around us radioactive with radiocarbon, but we are ourselves.
So you have it, I have it.
Correct. And as long as we live, we're taking more radiocarbon into our bodies. But when we die, we stop taking radiocarbon into our bodies. And so a dinosaur dies, it stops taking in radiocarbon, and then over the thousands of years, it's getting less and less radiocarbon. And as I said before, after 90,000 years, there should be no radiocarbon left in dinosaur bones. If every atom of the Earth was radiocarbon, it all would have decayed away in less than 1 million years. So if you already believe the fossils, dinosaur fossils, the coal beds, all those things are millions of years old, you wouldn't expect to find any radiocarbon in them. And yet you do. And this is one of the things that we found when we studied petrified wood like this at different levels in the geologic record. I was doing research on this. I was collecting samples in England, in Australia, and I sent them to the radiocarbon laboratories, and sure enough, they had radiocarbon in them. So this is another aspect of this whole time question, because if these things are believed to be millions of years old, like this petrified wood, and yet it has radiocarbon in it that says it's only thousands of years old, then it means that it calls into question the conventional time frame. And so we wanted to test this because we'd seen in the literature, this is in the conventional literature. In the 1980s, they developed a new methodology for measuring radiocarbon. They could count atoms of radiocarbon. That's how good it was. But they wanted to be sure that they weren't getting any contamination in their laboratories. And so they took samples like petrified wood, they took samples of dinosaur bones and coal and oil and natural gas and limestone even, and they put them in their equipment, and every sample they tested had radiocarbon in it. And this was reported in the literature, and they ignored it. So in our research, we decided, well, we'll test that for ourselves. We wanted to be sure that this wasn't an artifact of a conventional experimental method. So we selected samples from 10 different coal beds around the United States, some coal beds that were conventionally as young as 40 million years, some coal beds that were conventionally over 300 million years old. And when we tested them for radiocarbon, they had radiocarbon in them, and they all yielded the same radiocarbon age, which meant that these plants must have all lived at the same time and died at the same time. And that fits the flood paradigm, because these would have been pre-flood trees that were all buried together at the same time. But we went further. We thought, okay, let's test out some material that's come from inside the Earth that's got carbon in it. So we selected diamonds, because diamonds come from deep inside the Earth. Remember the volcano that we were at?
Yes.
The SP crater? Well, from inside the Earth, we have these volcanic eruptions that bring diamonds up. They're made down deep inside the Earth, which means the diamonds have never been in contact with the atmosphere until they're brought to the surface. Because carbon-14 is produced in the atmosphere, we wouldn't expect them to have any radiocarbon in them, because also they're the hardest substance known, so they can't be contaminated. So even when they arrive at the Earth's surface, you're not going to exchange carbon-14 in the atmosphere with carbon in the diamond. So whatever the diamond brought up from the depth has been bottled up and locked in. So we tested the diamonds. We got several diamonds from Africa, and every one of those diamonds yielded radiocarbon at much the same age. It was detectable radiocarbon. Now, we presented this research at a conference, the American Geophysical Union, one of the largest bodies of of geologists that get together. We had a poster presentation, and unbeknownst to us, one of the scientists that saw our presentation of the diamond evidence was from a radiocarbon laboratory. So he went back to his own university radiocarbon laboratory, got his own diamonds, and reported similar results to what we had found. Here's the sticking point. The diamonds are supposed to be between 1 and 3 billion years old. That's the conventional age. For them to be only thousands of years old flies in the face of the conventional wisdom. So when they published their results, what did they say? They tried to put it down to machine error, which of course is ludicrous, because even if you have no sample in your machine, have nothing in the machine, you won't get any radiocarbon. So if it was machine error, you'd expect it to show up radiocarbon when there was nothing in there. When you put the diamond in, it shows detectable radiocarbon, and it's been reproduced. So again, this is an illustration. You know, we did our own sampling, got our own laboratory results, and verified what was already in the open scientific literature for several decades, whether it's petrified wood, coal, dinosaur bones, the shells of shellfish, they all contain radiocarbon, all through the fossil record. And so that tells us that these layers aren't millions of years old.
Well, that brings us back again to the issue of the power of a paradigm. That if evidence doesn't fit in your paradigm, we have a tendency to discard it or ignore it.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like having a set of blinkers. I'm only going to believe what I see that fits in with what I already believe. And anything outside that's considered anomalous, I'll just shelve it as a tiny mystery and ignore it. And yet, the more that a paradigm is challenged, the more likelihood that there could be a switch, unless, of course, there's a spiritual dimension. And because, let's be honest, when we're talking about radiocarbon, these radiocarbon results, we're talking about an Earth that's only thousands of years old. We're talking about trees being buried in coal beds all in the 1 year during the flood. That's why they gave the same age. Then that's radically different from the conventional paradigm. They've excluded God from the picture. As soon as they have to admit that maybe the Bible is correct, that the flood paradigm of Earth history, the Genesis paradigm of Earth history is the correct view, then the Genesis paradigm includes a creator God to whom man is accountable. And that's why there's a spiritual dimension to it. And that's why they can deliberately choose to ignore the evidence, which is what the Apostle Peter said in 2 Peter chapter 3. They'll be willingly ignorant. It's not that the evidence isn't there, it's that they've chosen to ignore it.
And we're faced again with the issue of how closely tied together the issue of time is to both of these paradigms. Because if you have a short period of time in terms of all that we see around here, then it validates the history that's been recorded for us in Genesis. And just as you said, that brings us face to face with God.
Time is really the hero of the plot, whichever way you look at it. And this is the battle of these two views of Earth history. It's a question of the timescale involved.
Questions? I think he nailed it on the head when he said that there's a spiritual component to this. That if they're to shift their paradigm, what they've established, what they believe, would mean that they'd have to fit into a young earth. And the young earth would then support the flood, which is the Bible talks about with Noah. And as soon as you do that, you make him a living person. Now you have to look at there's a God. And that now you're accountable. Exactly. Becky said, you're answerable to God. And that's what they don't want. And I honestly think that when you look at those people who has come up with the evolution and Big Bang and all these things, they're godless. They don't believe in God anyway. And that the power of that false information has permeated across so deeply that it's affected a lot of Christians and shaken your faith when it comes to, again, what your kids are being taught, even in movies. I mean, even in commercials, no matter what you hear, you'll hear something about billion years. Just casually, just like, oh yeah, well, that happened a billion years ago. No, it didn't. And you start to plant that in, next thing you know, you have everybody believing in it, which means then you can start discrediting the Bible. One person, Becky said, Madeline O'Hara.
Everybody to start believing her, and then people would stand up for their faith.
Yeah, one person has a radical move. And again, and it's godless. It goes back to people that do not want a God. They don't want to be accountable. And so you'll shift that. And of course, there's a whole lot more people that do not believe in God than do believe. And so they're happy. They love it when somebody comes up with something they can use. That's why atheism is a religion. It's something you believe in by faith, that there is no God. The problem is, it takes, like I've heard many times, it takes more faith to be an atheist because there is no evidence. It's only a belief. There's far more evidences that there is a God, there is a designer. Even DNA, when we get to that, there's information being transmitted through DNA. Information. So where did that come from? Where did the information come from? They're just on and on. And one of the things that also took me back was the idea that this man took that information to one of the most renowned conferences of geologists, and they rejected it. Basically, and then one man went back to his lab, remember, he said, and reproduced it and said, wow. And then they come back and say, oh, it must have been a machine error. If they're doing that to scientists, don't feel bad when people are doing it to you. So it really does come back to a condition of the heart. And that's why I feel that I'm not sure how much you're going to be able to win people over if their heart's not right. It just isn't going to happen. But I want you, as a Christian, to be encouraged by these classes, to help you to know that you are right. There is a God. No matter what evidences that people are trying to throw at you, we are outnumbered, but we are not smaller, because God is far more powerful, and they're going to have to deal with a judgment. And so, but I hope that it was good for you. Good, Dorothy. I'm glad you joined us. And it looks like the video was really good here in the auditorium. I haven't had a problem with everybody out there on streaming, but in the building, but it seems like it worked pretty good. But I can't see anybody. But luckily I got the chat even working really well, so I can see it. And so if you're engaging, so it's a great class. I enjoyed it, but then again, the teacher, you should enjoy it. I hope you did. So we'll hopefully join us again. Come in, worship with us at 10:45, and then 4 o'clock this afternoon, Wednesday night at 7 p.m. And then we got the podcast on Friday, unless I get another shot and get sick like last week. Sorry about that, but didn't see that one coming. 10 o'clock on Fridays, we'll be having the podcast. We're looking at searching for the church through the book of Acts. All right. Thank you.